Good evening, everybody, and welcome to We the People. Tonight, We the People meet Bryan Witt. He is running for California's 27th Congressional District against Judy Chu, who is what looks to be a progressive Democrat and talks like a progressive Democrat. But if you dig a little deeper, not really. Not so progressive. Bryan's interested in bringing progressive values and progressive, actual progress into California's 27th District. We're looking forward to talking to him this evening. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us on We the People.
Thanks very much for inviting me, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to address the people of the 27th District, people of our nation, and whoever else is tuning in from across the planet.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for running. I really appreciate it. It's difficult to do.
Thank you.
And of course, everybody, this is an engagement broadcast. So we have the lovely Laura Live and Good with us, who is going to tell you the rules of engagement. Laura.
Yes, you people across the world who are lucky enough to be with us live in chat, you have the opportunity to ask questions of our guest. And if you have a burning question, I'm going to drop his website first so you can get the basics out of the way. But if you got those burning questions, especially as they pertain to his district in California, tag me at Laura Livengood or write the word question all in caps so that I can see them easily in chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. Bryan, before we talk more about Judy Chu and her not so progressiveness, let's talk about your cool job. You've got a cool job, honestly. I mean, you work for Amtrak, but you went through different jobs. Tell everybody what you do.
Yes, sir. I for almost 10 years now, I've worked with Amtrak. I started in 2008 as an onboard service person. I worked in all the jobs on the train. I worked as a coach attendant. I worked as a sleeping car attendant. I even worked as a waiter. And later on, I became a conductor for a while. Went back to onboard services, and then later on became an operations supervisor, which is an incredibly fun job. I'm right in the middle of all the action that takes place with our long distance trains. I inspect our equipment down at our 8th Street mechanical facility, which is about 2.5 miles south of Union Station. And there is all kinds of interesting things that take place down there. I interact with our commissary, which is run by Aramark, and with our onboard service employees, our mechanical department, and we're always on a very tight timetable. So it's an incredibly challenging and stressful job, but it's very rewarding. I really actually love what I do.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, you were telling me that you've taken the train up to where I am, because we have an Amtrak runs right through Albany.
Albany is one of our main stops. We don't always have a lot of people that get off at Albany. It's not a huge but it's a wonderful place. I've actually had the opportunity to get off at Albany, and amazing how friendly people are. I live in Los Angeles, where it's a big city, so you get the vibe of the big city in Los Angeles, but you definitely see the difference when you get off at Albany and people say good afternoon or hello, and I appreciate that. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time, my early part of my career, going back and forth to Seattle on Train 14. It's called the Coast Starlight. Going back and forth to Chicago on Train 4, which is the Southwest Chief, and going back and forth between New Orleans, which is the Sunset Limited. And we have an amazing group of union employees who for the past 40 years have endured incredibly difficult conditions that have been imposed upon us by a Congress that has continually attacked Amtrak, and we've survived despite their repeated attempts to cut our funding and try to eliminate us. We need passenger rail service. Being a person who works in public transportation, I'm a huge advocate of local public transportation and a huge advocate of our national rail network. If you'll recall, during and after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Amtrak was the only game in town. And we were able to move people around our nation when all the airlines were grounded. So not only do we provide a day-to-day transportation need for our people, but we also provide an incredible and a very important national security purpose for our nation.
Wow. Okay, so that's a very different perspective on trains than I had. All right. Not that I was like down on trains, but I wasn't exactly looking at trains as the future of what we needed, because Well, I'm going to get into a list, and I want to talk to you about that. I want to get educated because you're giving me a whole different perspective here. So I'd forgotten about that at 9/11. That was cool. In California, particularly, trains are essential. When I lived there, I was going from Upland, California, and working on the Strip, and you know how long that takes to get there, whether you're in a car or a train, right?
Right.
And I was having to go from subway to bus to train to make, where I needed to go. And those lines were critical. But it also seems to me that a lot of it, or all of it, is fossil fuel reliant. And so to me, the first thing that bothers me is, okay, I get it, public transportation, but we're still pumping tons of fossil fuel into this. How do we address that? How do we modernize the railways?
Well, as many of your viewers will remember who've been around the Southern California area for most of their lives, especially older people, we at one time had the most advanced public transportation system, if not in the United States, in the world. The Pacific Electric Railway ran all over Southern California, all the way down to downtown Los Angeles, from up here in the foothills where I live, into the far reaches of our county and our well, just let's leave it at the county level. Henry Huntington started this as a way to get people out into the suburbs to buy his residential real estate, and unfortunately, the county didn't have the vision at the time to realize the enormity of what they had, and they succumbed to the pressure of modernization, the automobile, and oftentimes the streetcars that we had. We had this gigantic network of streetcars and light rail, and oftentimes they would get stuck in traffic with the automobiles. We didn't have a coherent transportation strategy that was addressing the growth of the automobile and the growth of our population in that early part of the century. Now I seem to think that we've gotten back on track. Metro, with the leadership of Art Leahy and others, has done a tremendous job of trying to get our network better connected throughout our communities. Metro is expanding all the way out to Claremont. They'll be going further in the future. And what we need is a connected network of light rail, bike lanes, and other ways that we can get people out of their automobiles and onto public transportation. With our national public transportation network, our long distance trains, we've had a fight over these trains for years. John Mica, who was recently voted out of office, thank God, was on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. He was a huge enemy of Amtrak, and he called it a Soviet-style system, which is very unfair. And our union employees do a very good job with the limited resources that they have to get our passengers out and to their destinations on time. The National Association of Rail Passengers estimates that if we were to cut off our long-distance trains, the Coast Starlight, the Sunset Limited, the Southwest Chief, the Empire Builder, which runs along the northern part of our country, if we were to cut those routes off, we'd cut off about 140 million Americans from public transportation, because as we all know, our country is still largely rural. And we live in sort of a non-reality here on both coasts. The Northeast Corridor for Amtrak is very popular, and it's a huge network, but it's also not the only network. We have a lot of other people who are also needing public transportation in places in Kansas. We have a number of stops like Topeka, Kansas. They have virtually no public transportation. Amtrak's the only game in town.
Oh, you must be mistaken. Kansas, but Brownback's been running a trickle-down economics in Kansas. From what I understand, they're doing great, according to Fox News.
Yeah, if we could just let that invisible hand of the market take care of all of us, we'll all have a chicken in every pot, and we'll all be, live to be 100. Yeah, they are sadly mistaken. But Amtrak does a great job. I love the company. I love my job. It's the best job I've ever had. I've had other jobs where I've made a lot more money, but I really feel like I'm performing a very good public service and also making a good living.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And trains are fun. I've taken that Starlight Coast train up to Seattle. That was fun. It was nice not to have to drive. So
It's wonderful. Let somebody else drive, kick back, read your email, read a book, talk to other people in the dining car.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
wonderful experience.
I would never do that. But yeah. Anyway, anyway, I'm good, but I'm going to stick on this because okay, you're selling me on trains. I like the idea. I know we need to improve a lot of things, and especially security, safety around trains. Not Amtrak, but just in general. We see trains that are moving these fossil fuels, and I want to bring up. I don't know if we have any Germans in the audience today, but
I don't see any.
Germans, the Dutch, the Europeans are doing these things with trains running on hydrogen and water and solar. And can we do that? Jerry Brown is really set on continuing fracking and easing us into calamity with. I don't really know what he's doing there, but where do you stand on environment and how we stop fossil fuels, or do you think we're cool there with fossil fuels?
Well, I think that we should explore whatever new technologies exist out there for running our locomotives. Our locomotives sit down in our yards running on idle 24 hours a day.
Wow.
And they're pouring diesel fuel into the atmosphere. It probably takes more diesel fuel and more energy to restart those engines. I don't understand the actual mechanics of it.
Wow.
There's a reason that they do it, just like the reason that our trucks are idling down there at the ports. But I'm all in favor of looking into hydrogen or electric or other alternatives to run our locomotives. I think that we need to take a close look at that because the environmental damage that we're doing with fossil fuels is huge, and I think that we are at a point in history. We're at a tipping point, and I attended a series of lectures at Caltech that was taught by Carl Pabo, who's a very distinguished professor, and he was nice enough to let me sit in on some of these lectures, and he basically came to the conclusion that humanity is not going to be able to address climate change fast enough for it to make a difference. So what we need to do is mitigate the damage that is being done. And that's where companies like Amtrak and other national players, airlines, whatever the case may be, whoever is using whoever are the large users of these fossil fuels, we have to find a way to transition away from those. And we can talk about this a little bit later if you want to talk about climate change. But one thing that I'd like to do is, as a member of Congress, is introduce legislation for a moonshot or a Manhattan Project, if you will, for energy. And I would like to get us off of these fossil fuels. I'd like to be able to decommission all or most of our nuclear-powered facilities, our coal-powered power facilities.
Nice.
Let's say within 10 years. I don't know what the actual specifics of that would look like, but that's, I'm a politician, so I'm going to throw a number out there, and then we'll clean up the mess later. But we need to do something.
Actually, you're right on par with scientists and engineers that have created a 10-year plan to do exactly that. So,
okay, good.
I love that. We need bold action. Incremental climate adjustment. We die.
That's right. We're in big trouble right now, and we have a Congress that's more interested in fighting these wars for profit than they are with dealing with what is the actual and real most pressing issue that is facing humanity right now, and that is global warming.
Yeah, and I'm gonna top onto that. We actually have two pressing issues: global warming and a global oligarchy that just doesn't care.
That's right.
We have to work on the United States, but it's really happening all over the place, and we need to work on that. I want to stay on why. I want to shift a little bit to. I was reading this slide here. Early in my career, I volunteered as a reserve police officer with the South Pasadena. I'm going to let everybody see this. I'm just reading it. And it says, later I decided to enlist the United States Marine Corps. My 4 years of service in the Marines, thank you for your service, sir, at the height of the Cold War taught me a great deal about keeping a cool head when tensions are high. So you were doing this at the height of the Cold War. When were you in service?
Well, I was in from 1985 until 1989. That's probably I probably misspoke a little bit. That really wasn't the height of the Cold War. It was really when we were winding down the Cold War, but it was also still a very dangerous time.
Absolutely.
When empires start to die, they start to do things out of desperation. And, with all the amount of nuclear weapons that exist around the world, I think we're facing a similar situation right now with the United States. Our empire has gone on for something like 70 some years. And now China is ascendant, which is fine. It's kind of bound to happen. They have the biggest population. My only problem with that is that they are a police state, an authoritarian police state.
Right.
And so what I am trying to achieve by running for office is to help us to skillfully and wisely wind down our empire. I think probably many of your viewers may not be aware of this, but maybe many of them are aware of this, that the United States has over 800 military bases spread out over 80 countries across the planet. Now that to me does not sound like national defense. What that sounds like is empire. And we need to wind this down. It's okay to have a good, robust national defense, but don't let them fool you into thinking that our budget is only $600 billion. When you take the whole national security state, the Department of Energy, our nuclear program, the Department of Homeland Security, all of the intelligence agencies, and the military, it's somewhere around $1.2 trillion. And this is simply unsustainable, and it needs to stop. I think the primary reason for this is not that we face all these existential threats all over the world. There are some that we need to recognize, but it's more about making money for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and others in the defense industry.
Absolutely. Well said. And agreed. And coming from somebody who has served in the military, you've seen it. You know what it is. I think $600 billion is about what they lose every year.
Probably. Well, and the recruiting efforts are they're I don't know if you'd say just because somebody smoked marijuana that's a lower class of person, but the military is lowering the standard to allow people who smoke marijuana or whatever, which they used to didn't do that when I was in the military, but they're desperate for new bodies. And this tells me that they're desperate because, people are not volunteering in the numbers that they need. We have an all-volunteer force right now, but even that's kind of a misnomer because it's really an all-recruited force.
Right.
And they're having to give them these increased benefits to join. We have a huge number. I think it's something like 70% of those that they're recruiting are married. And that's a very big burden on our budget to take care of all the dependents. It used to be that most of the men or women, whatever the case may have been, were mostly single, and now most are married, and that is unsustainable to have a jobs program. We need to have a jobs program for people that's not based on blowing things up and killing people.
Right. That's you've just nailed the difference here. I want to wrap that up, and we're gonna go to Laura Live and go see if we have any questions, but. Oh, no, she's saying no. All right, we'll just keep going. But that's really America. We've used the guise of spreading democracy. Really, we're a global arms dealer and warmonger, and we need to shift to doing something else for a living. Right.
I would like to see us have our biggest export be a good example.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a good statement. That's absolutely what we need to see. So tell me about. You ran for city council Pasadena, and I had a slide that said you witnessed some stuff. What happened there in that situation?
Well, I got a very good education on the kind of shenanigans that takes place in the background. I don't really take it personally, but I think I kind of can't help but taking some of it personally. I found it odd that when I ran, I filed my paperwork kind of at the last minute. But there was still some time to go. But then on the very last day, these other two candidates showed up out of the blue. And I just thought it was interesting because it was going to be me against two Republicans. So one progressive against two Republicans. And
right.
I think we all know that when there's a race like that, that the powers that be sometimes might put somebody in there that doesn't really have the intention of winning. They just split up the vote. I don't want to make that accusation, but you can't help but have that suspicion when that sort of thing happens. But even beyond that, and I met a lot of very nice people when I ran for city council. I learned that many of the people that I spoke to when I walked around to get my signatures on the petition were supportive. Some even said, "Well, I don't agree with your positions, but I still think that you should be able to run." And so I was really encouraged by that.
Nice.
And I was able to meet a number of people who told me that they thought I was the most interesting candidate, that the other candidates really didn't have any ideas. For example, we're always lamenting the fact that we have the very high housing costs here in California. And I said, well, why don't we offer a third option? Why don't we make an ordinance and work with the state, and let's bring co-op housing into the mix here. Let's offer a third option to home ownership and renting, and this could possibly help to stabilize housing prices here in the city. So it was a really interesting process. I got inspired to do this by watching Bernie Sanders run for president.
Nice.
And I thought, well, I'd like to get involved in the political process, because I hadn't really been involved for over 20 years in the political process. And he was the first time that I really saw a candidate that I thought I could get behind.
Me too.
And I had been I've been listening to him for years on the Tom Hartman show. In fact,
Nice.
I've got Tom's book here, Cracking the Code. I don't know if
nice.
it comes up backwards. I'll read you something out of that later. Virtually anything that I've learned out of civics or about civics or about the history of our country, I've learned by listening to Tom Hartman. He's just an encyclopedia of facts about our history. And I don't always agree with the way he approaches callers on the radio, but that's a matter of style. I really admire a lot of what he's written, and I think he's a national treasure.
He's cool.
But,
we
yeah.
got to mention our channel in the primaries, so that was great. I like Tom.
We appreciate that.
He's never asked us on, but hey, Tom, along with the revolution. That's awesome. I want to shift to. I want to talk more about China, because we were talking in the green room about this, and you were talking about some other serious stuff, and then I realized there's an interesting connection here, and so you. Right now, the United States, the overall attitude that I see us having towards China, or let me say pre-Trump, when we had some kind of facade of government that was moral, we were trying to help China evolve. That was what I thought. Help China become something that wasn't such a human rights atrocity, and it seems like we've flipped. I would consider us almost as bad in many aspects right now, with ICE running around the country and cops shooting people whenever they please and getting away with it.
Right.
But you brought up, you're going to have to call it. You brought up something that's horrendous that's going on in China that has to do with organs, people stealing people's organs. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I would. I met with a couple of very nice ladies from China about a month ago who were both Falun Gong practitioners, and they told me a horrific story. One of the ladies, her and her mother, was a recent immigrant from China and actually didn't speak a lot of English. There was a lot of interpretation that was going on with the other lady, but her and her mother were arrested by the Chinese Communist Party, and she was both her and her mother were taken to a slave labor camp for over 2 years and made to perform manual labor and with other Falun Gong practitioners, and sign a statement renouncing the practice of Falun Gong. And finally, she was able to escape this. I don't think she actually physically escaped, but I think she was released. But she mentioned to me that people who were part of this prison population would often disappear. And so our own Congress, just recently in 2016, I'll read it for you here. They put forth a resolution. It was H.R. 343. As you know, these titles are very long. Expressing concern regarding persistent and credible reports of systematic state-sanctioned organ harvesting from non-consenting prisoners of conscience in the People's Republic of China, including from large numbers of Falun Gong practitioners and members of other religious and ethnic minority groups. This is a practice that's been going on for many years now with the complicity of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's not forget that they are not a democracy.
Right.
They may use some functions of capitalism to perpetuate their own power, but they're an authoritarian police state. And these ladies estimate, and others, credible sources, estimate that somewhere between 60 and 100,000 people have been murdered and had their organs forcibly removed from them, some of them while they're still living, so that they maintain the freshness of that organ. This is truly sickening, and it's on par, I think, with the worst atrocities of the Nazis and Joseph Stalin. And I believe we should slap the same kind of sanctions on the People's Republic of China that we do on North Korea. There may be a better way to do it, but I think we need to get to the bottom of who is perpetuating this and put them on a Interpol watch list and snatch these people up when they arrive in the United States and ship them off to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. This is straight up genocide. And I was encouraged that our Congress put forth this resolution, but I was also extremely disheartened that our representative here in the 27th District, Representative Chu, did not participate with the other 180 members of Congress in co-sponsoring this bill. Her family, from my knowledge, immigrated here from mainland China, and I can't understand why she's not shouting this from every rooftop. If I found out that my people in Holland were perpetuating a genocide against other Dutch people in Holland, I would be screaming about it. But I don't find her anywhere in this argument. In fact, a few years ago, when they had the celebration of the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Communist Party, Judy Chu showed up and helped them celebrate this with quite a large contingent of Falun Gong practitioners protesting.
Wow.
I can't imagine how a member of our Congress would be celebrating a group of gangsters that's responsible for the murder of over 60 million people.
Wow.
And that's what the Chinese Communist Party is. We have to remember, folks, that the Cold War really never ended. Just because the wall came down in Germany, we still have only an armistice with North Korea. We're still technically at war with them. And the other large or huge communist party that we've been supposedly fighting against all these years is still there, and they're still in power.
No, we trade with them now. We're buddies. We don't.
We're buddies, and this is probably why very few of our members of Congress want to really take this on in any substantive way. At least 180 of them had the guts to sign this resolution, but I really think that we need to put some teeth behind this.
Agreed, and the fact that Judy Chu doesn't leads me to believe that she is supporting donors, supporting people that are making money off the trade. I don't know anything about foreign policy. I'm really ignorant on it. But I always thought that, I hear China, we owe China a lot of money, we're in debt, they own America, all of our workers are over there, right? Because most of our stuff's made over there now, including all of Trump's merchandise, which is being run through the White House. So, we can't sanction China. We'd have no stuff here. Right?
Well, that's a possibility, but we could also put forth a plan to entice our manufacturing companies to come back here. And I would like to see that happen. Even if half the workforce is robots, that's fine.
Right.
Let's just bring it back here. Nations fight with each other from time to time, and sometimes we have great conflicts. If we were to have another conflict on the par of World War II, we'd be in big trouble, because we don't have much of a manufacturing base here. So I would like to do something to entice our corporations to come back to the United States. I'm not sure quite how we do that, but one thing I'd like to caution our progressive friends on is that, we rightfully so, we criticize corporations for influencing our elections, for shrinking our middle class and so on. We also have to remember that a lot of our friends and neighbors, family members are invested in the stock market through our 401ks and other areas. So this is a dilemma that we have. if we're going to get some kind of change, we have to make sure that we evaluate all the stakeholders and that we don't do anything reckless. Everything that we do, it has to be done with wisdom and with the smartest people in the room. And so one thing I've learned by working with Amtrak is that I may not know the answer to something, but I am surrounded by institutional memory. And I know who to call to, if I don't know the answer to something, I know who to call to find out who's going to give me the straight scoop. And I think that's what we need to do here.
I think that's smart. That sounds like you're talking about calling other people for advice because you're admitting you don't know everything.
That's right. I mean, the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know. I love to read, but there's just so many things, and that's where we need to call on people who have more experience than us and recognize that, hey, I can't do it by myself. It's a team effort.
Sure, like scientists and stuff when it comes to the environment.
Yeah, that's right. We want to call on the smartest people from MIT and Caltech. One thing I'll mention, excuse me, about Caltech and JPL, there's a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters there, which is very encouraging.
Imagine that. I didn't think there'd be a large contingent of Trumpers running around Caltech.
I don't think so.
That's just me. You're talking about enticing corporations to come back. I want to talk more about that because it seems to me like you've got corporations controlling our government. Really, in order for us to regulate corporations, which is the word no one wants to use, but that's what we're saying here, regulations, right? In order to do that, we have to put people in power that aren't going to take money from these people. You make it very clear that you are not for sale. Right? That's
right. I'm not for sale at any price. I haven't spent a lot of time pandering for endorsements or for money. And, people would say, well, you don't have a chance then. I beg to differ, though. I think if a guy asked me at a fundraiser that I did just recently, he said, well, what makes you think you could win? And I said, well, I had actually was sort of taken aback by the question, and because I wasn't quite prepared for that, but it was a challenging question. And I said, well, really, if people could hear me speak, I think that they would vote for me. The only reason that Judy Chu, Representative Chu, got 168,000 votes in 2016 is because there's no other choice. There's no other Democratic choice.
Right. Right. You're going to force that choice. You're going to split the vote. You're going to make it go Republican. I
think we have actually kind of I was mentioning this to Laura before we came on. I think we have almost kind of a purple district here. We're kind of almost evenly divided between no party preference, Democrats and Republicans. So I think we do need, progressives do need to assure people that we're not communists. We're not going to confiscate all their money and redistribute it to everybody. We're here to make a system that represents all of our people. And I think Bernie was right at the People's Summit when he said that the leadership of the Democratic Party has betrayed the working class in almost every imaginable way. We need to allow or open our doors to all of our people. And the way that it works now over the last 40 years, as Thomas Frank has told us, the Democratic Party's real base are the highly credentialed professional class, the people who sit at the top of the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street. And of course, they need representation too, but I think the 90% needs a hell of a lot more representation than the top 10%. Wealthy people always figure out a way to game the system or to just get ahead. I don't want to say that in a too much of a negative way, but they're smart people and they have the resources to get good attorneys and accountants that make sure that they minimize their tax bill. Our corporations right now, I always like to remind our progressive friends, they're doing what's really, for the most part, is legal. And so if we don't like what they're doing, we need to elect people that are going to make sure that we change that. Right. And so I want to change it. I still want free enterprise. I like free enterprise. I like freedom. I like people to be able to make money. But somebody making 800 times the rank and file, that's extreme and it's unsustainable.
It's ridiculous. It's greedy.
Right. It's just too much.
Yeah, there needs to be a point of morality there, and it's like no, like a moral clause. And when you said you gave corporations too much credit, I just want to say corporations in a capitalist society that we have, where there is very little democracy left and it's driven by profit, they can do what they want. That's what we're seeing, right? They're just taking advantage of what's there. Right? If we shifted that to where the benefit was to the citizen, then...
Well, and I made a post on this in Facebook or on Facebook not too long ago, and I said, I don't know if this is really accurate as far as how these things are defined, capitalism and so on. But I said, to me, the difference between free enterprise and capitalism, free enterprise is the lady that you see out on the street selling tamales. And that turns in at some point after a couple of years of hard work into a little cafe, which in another couple of years becomes 2 or 3 restaurants that creates prosperity for a family and benefits the community. Capitalism, on the other hand, seems to have morphed into greedy lawyers and accountants who collude with each other, get together, they find a marginal product, and then when they're done saturating one community, they go on to another community, and then when they're done saturating the United States, they want to go into the rest of the world and saturate their markets. So, I mean, Starbucks is a perfect example. You stand in line for 35 minutes to pay $7 for a cup of coffee. I don't believe that's sustainable. I don't think they benefit our communities.
Yeah. Well, all right. I mean, and I agree for the most part with your definitions there, right? The mom and pop though with the 2 stores could become Starbucks someday and turn into real dickheads. But that's
yes, that's for sure.
We see that.
We don't want to let them get too far. No, we got to have some kind of limitations on, and that's actually hardwired into our documents, our founding documents, on the how much wealth we allow people to accumulate. Right. And that's one of the reasons why we have the estate tax. It's not only just to generate revenue, it performs a societal function that we want to make sure we don't have dynasties, and that's what they wanted to prevent. And in the 17th century or the 18th century, is that we didn't have the same kind of dynasties and monarchy. Somebody mentioned, and forgive me for not knowing the person who said this, but this is common knowledge, but the way that he said it I thought was interesting. He said people forget that for 1,000 years, Europe was locked in the vice grip of the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the church. And we seem to have come kind of around full circle to that again, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We have monarchs. We have kings and queens that rule our government right now. They're just corporate kings and queens. They don't wear silly clothes. And, but we've allowed them to take power because you and I, Bryan, and Laura Livengood and everybody in the audience fell asleep at the wheel of our democracy.
That's right. And that's why I'm here. I fell asleep for about 20 years, and I've been awakened like a lot of our other citizens. I think this is happening around the world, that citizens are becoming aroused, and we've woken up a sleeping giant.
Yes.
We have to convince these folks at the top, the 1%, that it's in our combined best interest for us to cooperate and to make sure that we have a very robust middle class, because if we don't, we may find ourselves facing something other than a political revolution, and none of us want that.
Right. And honestly, believe me, if you back in the primaries, I was screaming, all right, it's done, it's time to move on. I was totally impatient with democracy. Now, I realize this is a long haul, right? We've got years to go before we even get, things going in a progress way at the top level of our government. You agree?
That's right. I agree. And that's why I've decided to stay within the Democratic Party. However, my goal is to disrupt, demoralize, and dismantle the corrupt leadership that we have in there right now that just maintains the status quo. And I'm hoping that more people like Randy Bryce and Tim Canova and Steve Jaffe will step up to the plate and just come up out of the woodwork with no invitation and run for these office and challenge these comfortable incumbents. That's what it's going to take. Chris Hedges, I think he makes a good point. He thinks that an electoral strategy is not as important as getting out in the streets. I think they're both important. We need to have both the people who are willing to run for office.
Oh,
we
yes.
need to have millions of people who are willing to come out into the streets and occasionally shut things down and let them know that, hey, we're not going away.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Chris Hedges and just I think where he might be headed with that, because I have a question on this. But I want to ask Laura Livengood, do we have any questions from the audience right now? No?
Nope. But everybody's digging what you're saying, so just keep going.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're rocking it. You're rocking it, Bryan. I'm kind of sometimes I sway to this boat here. Like I'm working democracy with you. We're trying to, get people put into office. It's the foot in, foot out strategy. We know we got to have people on the street. But I keep hearing people talk about, beyond the military industrial complex or whoever's pulling the strings there, we have this deep state and they're never going to let us control that. Do you believe in this deep? You've been in the military, I'm just curious.
I do. I think there are people who are out there and they are in and out of government and they sometimes hold up progress. I think even President Reagan got shut down on some things. Caspar Weinberger didn't carry out, didn't execute an order that he received from the president to snatch up those terrorists on the Achille Lauro.
Oh, wow.
These are the kind of people who are in the deep state, who they're the administrators of our intelligence agencies. There are people who get appointed to Secretary of State, and we have a lot of people like that. But I think that if we have more young people who are willing to go into our intelligence agencies, who are willing to go into government rather than going to Wall Street, eventually we can turn that tide. It's not going to happen overnight, but we want to, I think that we should have groups, like if you want to take a group like Indivisible or others, Brand New Congress, I think we should be out on college campuses and talking to people about hey, maybe you should try to join the CIA or the National Security Agency, or maybe you should try to get an internship with the State Department. I, as a person who've been in the military, I've been a reserve police officer, I'm kind of have a sort of a semi-conservative worldview. I am actually very optimistic about the strength of our institutions. I think the state of our union and the state of our institutions is actually still quite robust. But I think that what is not strong right now is the fact that we've allowed people within those institutions to subvert them, like our Democratic Party with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She basically threw the election in favor of Hillary Clinton. And so this is an example of bad people within what is essentially an okay institution, and we need to try to root people like that out. They do get punished. We saw Robert Hanssen, who was one of the most damaging spies in our history. He was eventually caught, and he's still incarcerated. He'll probably never get out of prison.
Right.
But our institutions, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, they're all there for a purpose to help protect us. But I think that our political leaders have abused these organizations. And so I really want to find those excellent people within our society who can be out there and get into these agencies and engage with the world and be a positive force for change. I think we probably still have too much emphasis on the sort of national security state. But we do need some kind of an intelligence apparatus. There are a lot of very dangerous actors in the world, and we need to keep an eye on them. But we also need the very best, most ethically, people with the highest ethical standards to occupy those agencies. I have members of my family who've been in the State Department, some of the finest people you'd ever want to meet in your life, and we need more people like that.
I'm glad you said what you did, because it's really hard sometimes to not think of the government as just one big giant corrupt ball, right? Mm-hmm. Because what we see out of it mostly is corrupt, right? But there are good people there. Where my dad worked for the government, he was a good guy, and so I get that there are good people, and I like that idea of we need to send our youth that have a moral compass, that have that understanding of people first. We need them in these agencies as much as we need you in California's District 27, right?
Yeah, I believe that. I think we could spend a lot more of our resources rather than in drone attacks and sending people out to engage with these various people around the country rather than blowing them up. Let's go out and talk to them and find out how we can move things forward. I mean, I've heard some people suggest that there is possibly at the very highest levels, a cooperation between China and Russia and the United States and Wall Street. And this is somebody that was interviewed on Chris Hedges' show. I can't remember his name. He's a very respected journalist. I'll send it over to you later. But that's what his sort of idea of this was. And this is, again, the Chinese, the Russians, the United States, we're all made up of people who want basically the same things. It's the people in the government who have the power that, the wall came down, the people actually were able to take over in Russia.
Right.
Unfortunately, it was the kind of a revolution that didn't end completely well. We still have Vladimir Putin, but I'm not so sure he's as awful as everybody makes him out to be. He's simply a leader of a great power, and he's going to do everything he can to make sure that his buddies are getting the benefits that they want, and he's going to try to hold together his own empire. So the people of Russia, the people of China, the people of the United States, we're the ones who have the ability to rise up and overthrow these sort of corrupt regimes. We have the ability to do that here in the United States. They have the ability to do it in China. They have the ability to do it in Russia again. And I hope that we can do it peacefully. And I would never support anyone who would advocate the violent overthrow of our nation. We have to do this peacefully. We have to look to people like Martin Luther King and Bernie Sanders and others to go about this political revolution peacefully and with cooperation with our friends and neighbors.
So I agree with you 100% on that. Thank you for that statement. I have a really hard time wanting to adhere to that, and I'm going to tie that in with healthcare and Judy Chu and what's going on in California right now, because. And the reason I say it is because our government, with this tax bill lately and what they were trying to do with the Healthcare Act, they are trying to kill us. I mean, to me, that's what it feels like. You're taking away my rights, my privileges, my ability to have health care. I can't afford to have anything. So the moment I get sick or the moment something happens to me, I'm pretty much toast. Right? And that's a slow way of killing somebody. I don't look at our government or our leader as any worse than Vladimir Putin at this point, really. You know what I mean?
Right.
Judy Chu, to get back to point of healthcare, she's on the Pelosi plan, it looks like. You want to talk about where you stand on California healthcare and differentiate yourself?
Well, sure. Judy Chu, she votes progressive most of the time. In fact, almost all the time she votes progressive. But she continues to accept money from the very people who are undermining our democracy. I'll talk about that in a minute. I personally think healthcare is a right. If you look on Representative Chu's website, she has pages and pages of explanation about how great the Affordable Care Act is. And I think as a member of the Progressive Caucus, at least I think she's still a member of the Progressive Caucus, and I think at one time she was the vice chair of the Progressive Caucus. I can't understand why she doesn't support single-payer health care. The majority of our people, whether they're Republicans or Libertarians or Democrats, want a single-payer healthcare system. Yeah. But these members of Congress are so beholden to the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry that they won't deliver it to us. And that's why I think if we need to run every last one of these 535 members of Congress out on their asses, then so be it, because they need to deliver single-payer healthcare to our nation. It's a human right, and it's something that our people want, and there's no excuse not to support this. Absolutely. So I absolutely don't want to undo the Affordable Care Act. Let's leave it alone. But if we are going to repeal it, let's repeal it and replace it with single-payer healthcare.
Right. And in California, really, the only thing stopping it is establishment Democrats. It's got the full support of everybody else, right? Oh,
this Anthony Rendon, he held this up. I can't believe this. That we could have passed it here.
Right.
And so now there's this effort, recall Rendon. I totally support that. I think he needs to be run out of town and out of office. And we need to get somebody into that seat who is going to support what the people want and what we need.
Absolutely. In terms of Judy Chu, I just want to show everybody this. We're looking at this. The top two contributors to her are Vote Sane PAC, which is interesting, and Select Medical Holdings, medical stuff. Vote Sane PAC, yeah, everybody, is... I was looking into this. Looks like a PAC. Okay, it's all real estate, Los Angeles, go figure. But they donate more to Republicans than they do to Democrats. So Judy Chu is just a lucky recipient of a Republican PAC money. right? That's what it looks like to me. And
Well, let me give you a little backstory about the city council race. When I ran the Democratic Party of Los Angeles, the party committee, I went to their little kangaroo court for their endorsement. And they took all of about 10 minutes to decide that they weren't going to endorse me. I got a voicemail message within about 15 minutes that there would be no endorsement, no explanation,
nice.
no offer for coaching. They could have said, hey, we liked what you had to say, but we think, you're pretty green, you need some help. Let's see how we can help you do this next time. No, nothing. Just a very short voicemail saying there'd be no endorsement.
Nice.
So Alex Menchaca, who was the sort of lifelong establishment Democrat who was running, they didn't endorse him.
Interesting.
And so then at the runoff, Judy Chu shows up and endorses Andy Wilson, the establishment Republican candidate. I thought, well, how is this for party loyalty?
Wow. Yeah.
And Andy is, he's a nice guy. I like him, but he's also heavily involved with a lot of the real estate projects that are taking place within the city. One of his biggest donors was one of the big investors in a very unpopular development project that's still in the works. So I find that ironic that Judy Chu takes so much money from the real estate industry. And when we see that banks and escrow companies and real estate agents and others who are in that industry benefit massively from the rising cost of real estate, I just find it very ironic that she continues to accept money from these folks. We want to stabilize real estate. I don't believe that residential real estate really should be an investment. I mean, I'm okay with, people like you or I who we've got some surplus money, we go out and we buy a fourplex or something. That's entirely different from these big investors that get together and put together, $100, $200 million projects. These are the ones who are subverting our cities and our democracy. And I think we need to put some strong regulation on these folks and find a way to stabilize our real estate prices, because they're going out of control. And I'm not so sure that there is as much demand as they are suggesting. I think some of it's artificial demand.
Interesting. Well, I think a lot of it, in cases that we've seen with especially Colorado and Oregon, the legalization of marijuana is just going to knock your housing already was crazy in the LA area, but now it's going to go insane because you've got a lot of pot growers that are going to be out there. You got people wanting to live in the area. And, that's what we've seen. Do you think it's a balloon? Do you think this stuff is going to pop at some point and you're going to see a recession in the housing market or the real estate market?
Oh, I think we will. I think just we'll look at the stock market. And actually, if you look at Tom Hartman, if you Google Tom Hartman and the two Santa Claus theory, you might find some suggestion of why the Republicans are putting forth such an insane tax plan that's very unpopular. They've done this before, and where they will run up the deficit spending, and knowing that they're going to lose the next election. And this is actually encouraging because it indicates to me that they think they're going to get their asses handed to them in 2018 and also in 2020. And they know that by doing this, they're going to crash the economy, and they're going to put the Democrats in a position where they'll never be able to implement the social programs that we all want. So they did it with Jimmy Carter. They did it also with Bill Clinton, but he was able to get a tax increase, and so he was able to move forward with some of his plans. But Google that. The Tom Hartman, he wrote an article about 9 years ago about this two Santa Claus theory that was from somebody that was a mover with the supply side economics. But this is a long-term Republican strategy to keep themselves in power. I almost think it's somewhat treasonous to intentionally craft legislation that is going to crash the economy just so your party can stay in power. Me as a person who's running for office, I'm going to do not what's best for my party. I'm going to do what's best for the constituents of the 27th district and what's good for the people of our country and the people of our planet.
That's awesome. And you're leading right into a stump speech, which is what I was going to ask you to do anyway. You have really educated us on a lot of stuff, and I appreciate that. Not only do you have a cool job, but you know a lot. And I would love to have you in California's 27th Congressional District.
Thank you.
So thank you for running. So tell us, if not Judy Chu, why should we vote for Bryan Witt?
Well, what I think we need is a generation of new progressive leaders. This is not a campaign really necessarily against Judy Chu. Somebody who was actually pretty hysterical about me running on Facebook said, "You have no case against Judy Chu." And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, I don't have to make a case against Judy Chu. I have to make a case for the things that the majority of people want. And I think that Representative Chu is good at showing up at these drive-by, ribbon-cutting ceremonies and so on, but she's really not driving a good progressive economic message. Free college tuition, Medicare for all, ending these wars for profit, strict and very robust regulation with Wall Street and especially with our banking industry. And these are all things that I'm going to bring forward if I'm elected. One of my heroes is Dennis Kucinich, who was, some say, run out of his district because he refused to support Obamacare. That's for the historians to decide. But Dennis Kucinich put forth a bill back in 2011, the National Emergency Employment Development Act, the NEED Act, and I would encourage your viewers to look this up. One of the things that they wanted to do with this act was to basically, in some ways, abolish the Federal Reserve and incorporate an agency like that within the Department of the Treasury that would be overseen by Congress. This is entirely consistent with our Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution bestows the power to coin money and to regulate the value thereof right squarely with our Congress. 100 years ago, or a little more than 100 years ago, in 1913, the bankers and the powers that be at the time got together out on Jekyll Island in Georgia and put together a system that allowed the commercial banks to create our money and charge us interest on it. And we pay hundreds of billions of dollars a year in that, and we don't need to. The U.S. can print up our own currency that's backed up by the full faith and credit of our country. The only difference is that the banks are not going to get cut in on the action.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I throughout the last 2 years became slightly educated on that, and it basically looks like we had a market crash, and the bank said, we can stop that from happening. Work with us. And now we have the Federal Reserve, and we don't need it. And so I'm all about that. Thank you. I think we need to get it out of there. Cut out the middle.
I'll leave you with one last thought on that. Henry Ford said years ago, if the American people truly understood our banking and monetary system, there would be a revolution before the morning.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. You are wonderful. Thank you so much for running for the 27th District, Bryan Witt.
Well, you're very welcome. I hope I can live up to that. I'm trying to be genuine and to address the needs of our district. And I think that this is the kind of strong, progressive, aggressive progressive message that I want to bring forward. And I think that's the trend in our country. And I hope that people will see that and that they'll entrust me with this very important work.
Awesome. Thank you. Tell everybody where to go to help you, support you, volunteer.
Sure, absolutely. They can go to Witt for Progress. It's just like my last name, WITT for progress.com. I also have a CrowdPack page. We're going to transition that over to the Act Blue. Right now it's still just an Act Blue splash page, which basically, in a nutshell, talks about what I believe in, what I'd like to accomplish. The CrowdPack page, if you just Google Bryan Witt and CrowdPack, it'll come up. There's a lot more of my backstory and a lot more of sort of my philosophical leanings on that one. But we're going to incorporate that onto the Act Blue page.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Laura Livengood, thank you for being comment mod, and everybody in the audience, thank you for being here.
I'm sorry I didn't have questions, but everybody was very impressed with what you said and would like you to
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Will you join us again?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. I really enjoyed this back and forth here and enjoy the opportunity to interact with people. I'm really excited about when we pick up our petitions here on the 14th of December, to get out and start collecting those signatures and talking to our neighbors and our friends throughout the 27th district.
Awesome. That's what's going to win you the race. Thank you so much, Bryan. The
Thank
Wood
you.
Brothers, When I Was Young. Why did we pick this song? Why did you pick this song?
Well, that was a surprise when you asked me to sum up the discussion with a song. I'm a very musical person. I play the guitar. It's actually
Awesome.
a profession I wanted to go into at one time. But my parents were very religious, and they didn't like the idea of me singing in bars. So they weren't real supportive, and my dad really didn't like the kind of music I liked. But I love this song by the Wood Brothers because it's kind of a lighthearted way to describe the intersection of our youthful ideology with the very hard, cold reality of adulthood. So in sum, or to sum it up, when I was young, I never thought I would have to care about these issues. I thought somebody else would do it. But now here we are in 2017, and I'm trying to do my part to make a better world and to make a better district. And we all have to care about this because the very survival of our nation, our democratic republic, and our planet is at stake here. And so, yeah, I hope you like the Wood Brothers. They're a very, very talented group of guys, and I love them to death.
Awesome. That's profound.